Hi, welcome to Kitty Witty Papercraft. I'm Amy, and in this video I am sharing some ways you can make pockets for your journals using vintage fabrics and trims. So I just have a bunch of different kinds of vintage fabrics here that I use to make my pockets in my journals, or at least some of the pockets. So it's just kind of nice to change up from using paper sometimes. And there's lots of different ways that you can make pockets from a variety of vintage fabrics. So I've got some journals here with me that have pockets in them already that I'm going to share with you. A couple of them are ones coming to my Etsy shop soon, and a couple of them are just personal journals. So I'll just kind of start here with my piles, and one of the materials that is great for pockets is vintage sheets. So I have two different styles or cuts of vintage sheets here. This tall stack here are hems from vintage sheets. So these have all been cut off of the sheets, and they come in all different widths. So a lot of them are about this size. I think this is like 2 3/4 inches wide. Some of them are a little narrower, like 2 1/4 inches. And these awesome hems came from my friend Emily's shop. It's called Little Cotton Cottage. She's on Etsy. She's also on Instagram. And I just thought this was so cool. I hadn't seen hems before in Etsy shops. So you can find on Etsy lots of sellers selling vintage sheets in different sizes, like fat quarters, and which are like 18 by 22 inches, and also squares, because quilters will use pieces in those cuts. But I thought the hems was awesome for journalers because they make great pockets, like I said, and I've got a couple other different ideas for these. So they're going to come in handy. So I will link up her shop in the description box below. But I wanted to show you how I use the hems, and I don't have any particular or any journals right now that have the just vintage sheet pockets in them, but I just wanted to share that they make great pockets, because if you can get these charm pack square, a lot of times they're called charm packs, or they're just sold as 5-inch squares, sometimes 6-inch squares, you can find them, and then also fat quarters of vintage sheets. So what I did in these journals, let's see, now I have to remember which ones have the sheets in them. Okay, so this journal here that I'm working on, I just added part of this hem here as a pocket. And it's nice because the top is already hemmed and the bottom is folded, so it's closed in the top and the bottom. So I just trimmed the sides and attached it with really strong double-sided permanent adhesive tape. Sometimes I don't like the sewing to show through on the other side. You can sew your fabric to paper, but you don't have to. And I have a lot of people tell me that they feel limited in what they're able to do in their journals because they don't sew, or they think that you have to have sewing skills to make junk journals, and you really do not. It's just optional. Using tape works just as well. I don't use liquid glue because sometimes it'll show through and dry in an obvious way, so I always use strong double-sided permanent tape, and that works just fine. So I use the wider, like I said, this is almost 3 inches wide. It's a great size for a pocket. But I also used this narrower size here. And because it's kind of shallow for making a pocket, now I gotta remember it's in this one. I forget which journals have which pockets in them. So for this narrower one, I made a double pocket here. So it's actually 2 layers. There's a top pocket and then one in front of it. So that's kind of a way you can use the narrower ones. And plus these are just fun pockets. I've done this with paper before, but it just adds another kind of some layers of interest, and then you can put different things in the front that are smaller than what you put in the back. So that's just another way you can do some pockets. All right, so that's vintage sheets. The next thing I'll share are vintage handkerchiefs. So these make great pockets also, and there's a couple different ways you can do that. So I've got this cover here that I'm working on, and this one I just cut the handkerchief, and I started sewing it. I haven't finished, so this one will get sewn in the middle and across the bottom, so there'll be pockets in the front and back inside covers, and then I just have to add my pages inside still. So that's one way you can do it. And in this journal here, I actually took the handkerchief on the center page of the signature, and I wrapped the handkerchief around from the back to the front, and then just folded down the top edge, both sides, and I stitched this one down along the sides and in the center. So you've got pockets here on the fronts and the backs of that page. And I did the same thing with this insert. So this one is sewn into this journal, but you can also just create like a standalone insert. And this is like a little pocket ephemera holder or folder. And it's done the same way, just wrapped the handkerchief around and I sewed it down, and I have a little folder, and then I can add this to a journal. So like my inserts are in here, but I can also just add a folder here, and then I can add another elastic to this and then add another journal inside. So now I've got a folder in there that holds ephemera that I might want to use when I'm making or working on my journals. So let's see, let me make sure I get that one out. I'm going to want to use that one again. So I think that's the only examples I have of the handkerchiefs that I've used in these particular journals that I've got going right now. But you can also use some of the smaller ones just to make like a little tuck spot or something. You could, this is kind of a small page here, but you could just take one of the corners and cut it down and attach it and make that a little tuck spot with handkerchiefs. So these are fun to use. The next thing I will share is chenille. So like I just showed my chenille traveler's notebook cover. I love using chenille. I've used it to make planner clips, and now I make these covers, but I've been using them to make pockets for a long time also. So I buy these in squares. They're already cut squares. You can find them on Etsy and on eBay, and sellers will sell these to quilters or people that make baby blankets, and they will make like little, squares, like when you make a quilt, but using chenille. But so they're cut the perfect size for pockets and for the journal sizes that we use. So I'm trying to remember. So this journal has a simple little chenille pocket in it. And I also have this binder style journal that I made last year, and this one is on the back side of an insert, and I just attach that. And one nice thing about using fabric pockets in journals is that you can pin things to them, and you can't do that with paper, so that's kind of fun. So I like to pin like some little buttons or charms or something on those. So that's kind of another bonus to using fabric for your pockets. And another fabric that you can use is vintage quilt pieces. So you can sometimes find like remnants of quilts or cutter quilts, like quilts maybe that had a lot of damage to them, tears or staining or that sort of thing. And you can buy scraps. These were sent to me by a good friend of mine, so I feel very fortunate to have these, and they make really beautiful pockets. So in this journal here, I just attached this one. I cut my piece off of my piece of quilting, and I stitched it before attaching it in this journal, on this journal page, because I didn't want the stitching on the back of this page here. And then I just did a little pin with my bottle cap on there. And those make really fun, just kind of, just really neat texture in your journals. So that is vintage quilting. And then you can also use trims. So I have a couple different kinds of trims here. Gosh, I got fuzz and hair all over the table. The blanket binding, this is really fun because there's a couple ways you can use this binding. For one thing, it's wide. So when you're doing trims for pockets, You want to look for trims that are, I would say, at least 2 inches wide, and that's pretty easy to find. This is probably, it's 2 inches wide. This is also 2 inches wide, yeah. And the way I used that in this journal, I made a traditional pocket here on the bottom of the page. So I just attached that with the double-sided tape. And in this journal here, I actually wrapped it around this page just like you would do if you were making a blanket. So the binding wraps around the edge of the blanket and then it's stitched on. And this one, I just wrapped it around the page edge and left the sides open. So it's like a little side entry pocket there. And then I just added some trim on top of that. So that is blanket binding. And then you can use other kinds of trims like these embroidered trims in the same way. You know, the narrower ones, these make great side entry pockets. The wider ones make really nice bottom of the page pockets. But you can also use this doubling up with another kind of narrow trim like I showed in that one journal where you have like 2 layers in your pockets. So just a couple different ideas there. So let me know if you have any questions about any of that. You know, I find my vintage fabrics in all sorts of places, antique shops, sometimes thrift stores. They're great places to find handkerchiefs, especially sometimes vintage sheets. But yeah, so thrift stores, antique shops, and sometimes, you know, yard sales, estate sales, that sort of thing. And then Etsy and eBay are great sources for any of these kinds of fabrics also. So let me know if you have any questions. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you really soon.